Y ahora? Y ahora? Alibabá and Santo Domingo Carnival and the emergence of a performance genre. The performance groups known as Alibabá are the first and only of their kind in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, to create a carnival spectacle with equal elements of sonic and visual displays. And as we will see in a brief video clip, performing a unison dance routine, accompanied by a marching rhythm on percussion and brass instruments, while dressed in exotic costumes. Y ahora, now what? With all of these efforts by the Ministry of Culture, what can account for the decline of Alibabá on the national stage? Why did this nationalization project fail? This project admittedly grew out of my own love of Alibabá and my personal struggle to understand why it has not enjoyed the same celebrated status as, say, samba in Brazil. However, it matters now because of the desire of Alibabá leaders to be accepted as quote-unquote executors of Dominican culture, and because of a continued and concerted effort by the Ministry of Culture to present Alibabá as a central genre of carnival music. In this paper, I explore 3 moments in the story of Alibabá among residents of Santo Domingo, proposing a 3-tiered theory of nationalization that considers selection, presentation, and participation. What emerges from these moments is a clearer understanding of the socio-economic dynamics of an emergent genre in the context of both the successful, and in this case, unsuccessful, nationalization of culture. We start our journey with the emergence of Alibabá as a fledgling practice in the shadow of Luis Diaz's Baila en la Calle, or Dance in the Streets, the official carnival merengue commissioned for the first National Carnival Parade in 1983. Based on the ideas of Ruth Hellier Tinoco, I see the first step in the process of the nationalization of cultural performances as the careful selection and incorporation of dance and music practices as emblems via intellectual or institutional intervention, thus creating a shared national folklore. As Catherine Hagedorn shown, this intervention has often been undertaken in order to make a practice more tangible by creating quote-unquote units of performance. I now want to apply these ideas to unpack how issues of selecting folklore, including notions of tradition and otherness in Santo Domingo, affected the visibility of Alibabá in its formative years. As a unit of performance, Alibabá emerged in the mid-1970s in the inner-city barrio neighborhoods of Santo Domingo. The Alibabá are so named because of the story Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, with costumes originally meant to evoke Arab imagery, including beards, robes, and turbans or headscarves. To the costume, performers added a set repertory, including group choreography and an approximation of an Afro-Antillean marching folk rhythm from the neighboring region of San Pedro, performed on snare drum, bass drum, and bottle. We'll watch now a brief video clip recorded at the Alibabá Festival in 2013, which is a recreation of the original rhythm from the 1970s, performed by one of its innovators known as Pachilo, seen here in the center, who otherwise retired from performing in the 1990s. Alibaba as a carnival genre also coincided with an increase of freedom of cultural expression and prominence of popular carnival celebrations in the capital with the victory of the Dominican Revolutionary Party, or PRD, in 1978. In the wake of this return of liberal democracy, folklore scholar Dagoberto Tejeda Ortiz and other members of the PRD proposed to create a quote-unquote national carnival parade, which would put on display the carnival traditions of the entire country at one time and in one place. Tejeda Ortiz was charged with commissioning the first official carnival music theme and asked his friend and singer-songwriter Luis Diaz to compose a new merengue song. As a composer associated with the Nueva Canción movement in Santo Domingo, Diaz's goal for Baila en la Calle was to create a musical fusion contrasting modern urban merengue music with an infusion of many types of traditional rural Dominican folk musics. In the video for the song, Diaz is joined by a mass of people celebrating carnival in the streets of Santo Domingo's barrios, some of whom play Afro-Dominican drums and Haitian-Dominican bamboo trumpets. Their performance alternates with footage of parading carnival groups from the capital, including 3 different Alibaba groups. However, the sound of Alibaba is conspicuously absent. We'll watch here a brief video, clip of the video of Baila en la Calle, juxtaposing the sounds of merengue and Afro-Dominican instruments with the visual images of carnival, including an Alibaba group dancing at the end of the clip.
De día y con urgencia loca, disfrutes la vida.
En el carnaval,
De día,
de noche,
de día,
de noche,
de día,
de noche,
de día.
para que juntemos nuestras alegrías.
According to Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblett, folklore becomes valued because of its links to, quote, past, exhibition, and difference, end quote. Although the Alibaba rhythm was based on an Afro-Antillean rhythm from rural San Pedro, the people doing Alibaba in the 1980s were urbanites and not necessarily ethnically distinct from other Dominicans in the capital. In other words, Alibaba embodied neither pastness nor difference, which both certainly played a part in rendering it sonically invisible at the time. The social goals of the PRD and artists like Luis Diaz was to select and promote traditional Dominican carnival activities, and especially Afro-Dominican folk traditions as a part of the new national discourse. Alibaba simply did not fit these selection criteria. However, selection is only one step in creating national cultural emblems and often goes hand in hand with its staged presentation. As Soyla Mendoza reminds us, nationalization involves, quote, public forms of expression that are selected as being representative of a whole region or nation and are staged or promoted as such, end quote. Moving forward in time in the story of Alibaba, I now pause to look at the rise of the Alibaba Orchestra with Alex Boutique's recording of Mambo Alibaba and his presentation at the 45th anniversary concert for salsa legend Johnny Ventura in 2002. In the process, I'll point to the ways that the economics of concepts like professionalism and showmanship worked against presenting Alibaba as a staged act. Due to a period of general economic stability in the 1990s, Alibaba groups increased in numbers and the size of their percussion ensemble began to grow. In turn, Alibaba groups turned to the showmanship of successful merengue conjuntos or small bands of the time as models to copy. One such pioneer, Francisco Blanco, also known as Alex Boutique, joined his first Alibaba group in 1996 before slowly taking over as leader and musical director of the Kings of Carnival in 2000. Boutique expanded his instrumentation to imitate the merengue conjunto, and in this way, Boutique created the foundation for the first professional Alibaba orchestra that was capable of performing on stage independently of the Alibaba dancers during carnival parades. Also in 2000, cultural agent Roldan Marmo of the Bahia Onda Cultural Foundation secured some funding to compile a recording of Dominican carnival music, and he wanted to capture a carnival theme in the style of Alibaba. He turned to his fellow expert in Dominican carnival, the aforementioned Tejeda Ortiz, for his recommendation, who in turn gave him the name Alex Boutique. At Marmol's request, Boutique quickly put together an Alibaba anthem for the recording, performing a faster merengue-influenced rhythm that became known as mambo. By all accounts, Boutique's Mambo Alibaba was a hit and helped establish Boutique as the premier Alibaba orchestra. Subsequently, Boutique was invited to perform as the opening act for Johnny Ventura and Santo Domingo in 2002. Billed now as the Kings of Mambo, the orchestra performed in the presence of top acts like Celia Cruz and, of course, Johnny Ventura. We'll watch now a brief clip of the performance from the DVD of the concert, noting the increased showmanship and professionalism in terms of the uniform dress and instrumentation of the performers in comparison to the more informal performance of Pichilo that we saw in the first video.
Desde la Jacuba a la Villa Francisca,
Los Reyes del Mambo.
Esto se lo sabe todo el mundo. ¡Que cante conmigo!
This was the first instance that Alibaba was selected and presented as a central genre of carnival music, and by all accounts had the criteria to rise to national awareness. Unfortunately, the success of the Alibaba Orchestra was surprisingly short-lived, with only 3 or 4 orchestras rising to only minor acclaim. In this instance, the rise and decline of the popularity of the Alibaba Orchestra rides the coattails of the Dominican economy, with a period of substantial growth and relative prosperity from 1992 to 2002, crushed by a defeating economic crisis in 2003. As Thomas Torino points out, the link between professionalism and nationalism does not necessarily stem from one's own nationalist sentiments, but rather from, quote, professional aspirations and a quest for originality in conjunction with the record-buying public and nightclub audience, end quote. Thus, selection and presentation may be necessary steps in the process of nationalization, but it also requires economic wherewithal to sustain its consumption on the national stage. According to Boutique and other Alibaba orchestra leaders of the time, with the crisis, middle-class patronage and investment in Alibaba groups and orchestras dwindled, along with the public interest in buying carnival music recordings. Even opportunities for paying gigs in the barrio nightclubs all but disappeared. In this case, the selection and presentation of Alibaba on the national stage was undermined by an unsustainable product with no clear consumer audience. As I have shown, selection and presentation are reliant on creating a national product and an audience of consumers. Yet the process of nationalization can also occur if the audience is transformed into producers of the performance practice as well. Returning our gaze to events like the music festival, I interpret what is happening now in the story of Alibaba in terms of participation. I will end our journey in the footsteps of present-day Alibaba bands who are collaborating with rap artists in order to understand the importance of the audience as participants in transforming local pastimes into national ones. Using the example of the track Ahora by El Chima and Macasa, and musicians from the Los Mina neighborhood in East Santo Domingo, I suggest that the contemporary productions have currently fortified Alibaba as a part of local identity rather than a national one. One of the biggest shifts in Alibaba performance post-economic crisis was from Alibaba as a professional aspiration to the return of Alibaba as a pastime, or something that people do regularly for enjoyment rather than work. Whereas in the early 2000s, the Alibaba orchestras turned to merengue conjuntos as performance models, and now Alibaba bands since Boutique's retirement have consistently relied on reggaeton or rap called dembow in the Dominican Republic as their source of musical inspiration. These bands sped up the Alibaba mambo rhythm yet again, and shifted away from melodic instruments, adding the timbales as the lead instrument and replacing the bottle and trombone of the Alibabá orchestra with homemade PVC pipe trumpets. Overall, Alibabá bands became more flexible in terms of instrumentation, with groups again as small as 2 snares and 1 bass drum, to bands with upwards of 20 percussionists, depending on what resources are available. As an example, the city of Los Mina in East Santo Domingo is home to 2 relatively small Alibabá bands, Classical Empire and the Strongmen of Mambo. As one of the few opportunities for musically inclined beginners to access instruments, Alibabá bands and dembo artists in the more economically precarious barrios are particularly reciprocal. Several prominent examples of dembo artists, including Mozart La Parra on the left and El Chima and La Casa on the right, got their start within the Los Mina Alibabá bands. In 2014, Juan Arberos Osuna, also known as El Chima, recorded his anthem Ahora. In the video, El Chima is accompanied by select members of the Strongmen of Mambo, playing snare, bass drum, PVC trumpet, and timbales, laying down a fast mambo groove, and El Chima rapping on the subject of Dominican Carnival and daily life in the barrio. In the video, you'll see visual images of the barrio, including carnival costumes, graffiti, and the neighborhood itself, in addition to sonic features such as the PVC pipe trumpet and the timbales, in addition to a heavy reliance on Dominican slang.
Esto es Carnaval Dominicano, tú ves que lo que es, el chisme en la casa, eso, los DJ patio, suelta todo. Que salga el diablo para la calle dando moña. Que me vestí de doña para salir a buscar la moña. Mátalo, caquero.
I have demonstrated that it is important to understand how the socioeconomic dynamics of an emerging genre affect its visibility on the national stage. As the cost of operating an Alibabá group began decreasing, they were able for the first time to spread out of the heart of the capital and become equally popular throughout the urban sprawl of the Santo Domingo provinces. Therefore, Alibabá has, if nothing else, been enormously successful in getting people from lower income neighborhoods together in one place at one time. However, what is put on stage at the annual music festival is an almost exclusively barrio affair, performed by barrio residents with, by and large, audiences filled with their friends and family. In this instance, it is easy to see that selection and presentation on the national stage may also not be enough if the consumers and the producers of the practice are the same and represent only one segment of the population. Although Alibabá has been an important part of the identity of barrio residents in Santo Domingo, its continued association with the inner city has created mistrust on the part of middle-class audience members and potential investors. For example, the large crowds of young males attracted by the increasingly popular Alibabá performances has resulted in their negative association with delinquency, debauchery, and pickpocketing. The lack of these groups' socioeconomic visibility sustains a symbolic class stigma against Alibabá, despite its promotion by carnival organizers, because it does not represent a desired image of the Dominican nation. It is not that Alibabá is un-Dominican, but it is the wrong kind of Dominican. In considering a 3-tiered approach to nationalization projects, cultural organizations and government entities can better understand the reasons that these projects may remain incomplete, or that sometimes selection and presentation may not be enough. Rather, all one needs to do is look at the grassroots projects that some Alibabá groups are currently undertaking to understand the potential for Alibabá to transform into a valued national pastime for all, including Alibabá groups that double as marching bands for professional baseball teams and political events, to Alibabá groups participating in Dominican Day parades in New York City. In the end, taking participation into consideration, one can adapt their cultural policies and nationalization strategies to better address the needs and goals of performers and audiences alike.